The scream echoed through the afternoon air, slicing through the peaceful quiet of Ukiah, California like a knife. Margaret Price had been riding back from delivering medicine to the Wilkins family when she heard a woman's desperate cry cutting off suddenly, as if choked by water. She yanked the reins of her chestnut mare, turning the horse toward the sound that had come from the old Callahan property. Darcy Callahan struggled against the iron grip on her throat, the cool water of the well already to her chin as her stepfather, Vernon Blackwell, pushed her deeper. The well's stone walls scraped against her back through the thin cotton of her dress. Her lungs burned for air as panic consumed her. "You'll not tell another soul what you saw," Vernon hissed, his voice slurring from the whiskey he'd consumed since dawn. "Your mother may believe your lies, but I'll make sure they die with you." Darcy's honey blonde hair floated in the dark water as she fought against his grip. Her mother had married Vernon just 6 months after her father died of pneumonia in the harsh winter of 1878. The man had seemed kind at first, helping with their struggling ranch outside Ukiah. But that facade had quickly crumbled once the marriage certificate was signed. When Vernon had discovered Darcy's letter to her aunt, detailing his cruel treatment of her mother, his rage had exploded. He dragged her from the house by her hair, straight to the old well behind the barn where her father had once drawn water for their crops. "Please," she managed to gasp before he pushed her head under. The water closed over her face, cold and dark. Darcy thrashed against his hold, but her skirts were heavy, dragging her down. Her chest tightened, demanding air she couldn't provide. As her consciousness began to fade, she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Vernon must have heard them too. His grip loosened momentarily, enough for Darcy to surge upward and scream once more before he shoved her back beneath the surface. Mitchell Price had been tracking a wounded coyote across the ridge when he heard the scream. Something in that terrified sound made his blood run cold. He abandoned his hunt immediately, spurring his horse toward the Callahan place. The 26-year-old cowboy had been working ranches around Mendocino County since he was 17, but he'd only passed through Ukiah occasionally. His latest job at the Harper Spread had brought him to the area 3 months ago. He'd seen Darcy Callahan a few times in town, her golden hair and determined stride making her stand out among the townspeople, but they'd never formally met. As Mitchell approached the Callahan property, he saw a man hunched over the old well, his arms extended downward, clearly struggling with something or someone. Mitchell drew his revolver as he dismounted, approaching cautiously. "Hey there," he called, his voice sharp with authority. "What's going on?" Vernon Blackwell straightened, his expression shifting from rage to practiced calm with unsettling speed. "Just clearing a blockage in my well," he said, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Nothing that concerns you, stranger." But Mitchell had already spotted the ripples in the water, a pale hand breaking the surface before disappearing again. Without hesitation, he raised his gun. "Step away from that well," he demanded. When Vernon hesitated, Mitchell cocked the hammer. "Now." Vernon's face contorted with anger, but he moved back. The moment he was clear, Mitchell holstered his gun and rushed to the well's edge. Peering down, he could just make out a woman's form beneath the water's dark surface. "Dear God," he muttered, then plunged his arm into the cold water, finding purchase on fabric. He heaved upward, pulling with all his strength until Darcy's head emerged from the water, her lips blue and her eyes closed. Mitchell grabbed her under her arms, hauling her over the well's edge. He laid her on the ground and pressed on her chest, desperate to expel the water she'd swallowed. "Come on," he urged. "Breathe." Behind him, Vernon Blackwell was edging toward the barn. Mitchell was aware of the movement but couldn't spare attention from the drowning woman. He pushed on her chest again, harder this time. Suddenly, Darcy convulsed, water spewing from her mouth as she gasped for air. She rolled to her side, coughing violently, her entire body trembling. The sound of a rifle being cocked snapped Mitchell's attention back to Vernon, who now stood with a weapon trained on them. "This is family business," Vernon said coldly. "You do well to ride away and forget what you think you saw." Mitchell deliberately placed himself between Vernon's rifle and Darcy's recovering form. "Attempting to drown your kin isn't family business," he replied steadily. "It's murder." Vernon's finger twitched on the trigger. "She's my stepdaughter and I'll discipline her as I see fit." Discipline. Mitchell's voice was ice. "Is that what you call it?" A weak hand grasped Mitchell's arm. Darcy had pushed herself up, still breathless but her eyes flashing with determination. "He found my letter," she rasped. "I wrote to my aunt about what he's been doing to my mother." Vernon's face darkened. "Lying little. I heard enough of what you said while you were trying to drown her," Mitchell cut him off. "So either pull that trigger or put the rifle down, because I'm not leaving her with you." For a tense moment, it seemed Vernon might shoot. Then, from the direction of the house, a woman's voice called out, "Vernon, what's all this commotion?" A distracted glance was all Mitchell needed. He drew and fired in one fluid motion, the bullet striking Vernon's shoulder. The man howled, dropping the rifle as he clutched his wound. Elizabeth Callahan appeared from around the barn, her face pale with fear. She took in the scene, her soaked daughter on the ground, a stranger with a smoking gun, and her husband bleeding from the shoulder. "What in heaven's name?" she began. "He tried to kill me, Mama," Darcy said, her voice stronger now. "He was going to drown me in the well because I wrote Aunt Susan about how he hits you." Elizabeth's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between her daughter and husband. Something in her expression hardened as she looked at Vernon. The fear that had dominated her features for months seemed to crumble, replaced by cold fury. "Is this true?" she asked Vernon. Though the question seemed rhetorical, Vernon spat on the ground. "The girl's always been trouble." "Filling your head with nonsense." Mitchell kept his gun trained on Vernon. "Madam, I arrived just in time to pull your daughter from that well. He was holding her under." Elizabeth moved to Darcy's side, helping her to her feet, supporting her trembling form. For a long moment she stared at her husband, years of fear and disappointment evident in her gaze. "Get off my property," she finally said to Vernon, her voice shaking but resolute. "I want you gone before the sheriff arrives." Vernon laughed bitterly. "Your property? This land is mine now, woman. Your name isn't on a single deed." "Actually," Mitchell interjected, "if this ranch was her late husband's and passed to her upon his death, California law protects a widow's property rights, even after remarriage." Vernon's eyes narrowed. "And what would a saddle tramp know about law?" "My father was a judge in Sacramento before consumption took him," Mitchell replied evenly. "I picked up a few things." Darcy's breath was steadier now, though she leaned heavily on her mother. "The deed is in Papa's strongbox," she said, "and Papa left everything to Mama." Vernon's face contorted with rage. He lunged for the fallen rifle, but Mitchell was faster, kicking it beyond his reach. "Don't make me put another hole in you," Mitchell warned. "I'll be happy to escort you to town for the sheriff to deal with, or you can ride out now, never to return." "Your choice." For a moment it seemed Vernon might challenge him again. Then, clutching his bleeding shoulder, he backed toward the barn. "This isn't over," he growled. "Yes, it is," Elizabeth replied, finding strength in her daughter's presence and the stranger's support. "And if you ever set foot on this property again, I'll shoot you myself." Vernon's eyes darted between the three of them before he spat once more and stormed into the barn, emerging minutes later on his bay gelding. He glared at them as he rode past, but made no move to approach. Once he had disappeared over the ridge, Darcy's knees buckled. Mitchell caught her before she hit the ground, gathering her slight form in his arms. "We need to get her warm and dry," he said to Elizabeth, "and someone should fetch the sheriff." Elizabeth nodded, leading the way to the modest farmhouse. "Bring her inside. I'll heat water for a bath." Mitchell carried Darcy through the doorway, careful not to bump her head on the frame. The Callahan home was simple but clean, with handmade quilts and curtains adding touches of color to the otherwise sparse furnishings. "You can lay her on the sofa," Elizabeth directed, already bustling to stoke the fire. "I'll get blankets." Mitchell gently placed Darcy on the worn sofa. Her golden hair was plastered to her face, her dress clinging to her slender frame. Despite her ordeal, her eyes were clear and focused as they met his. "Thank you," she whispered. "If you hadn't come—" "But I did," he said softly, impulsively taking her cold hand between his warm ones. "And I'm glad of it." A faint blush colored her cheeks as she withdrew her hand, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of their situation. "I don't even know your name." "Mitchell Price. I work at the Harper Ranch just over the western ridge." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "The new wrangler." "I've heard Mr. Harper speak highly of you." Elizabeth returned with blankets and a worried expression. "The water's heating, but it'll take time. Sheriff Holden is in Hopland today, won't be back till tomorrow." She wrapped her daughter in the thickest quilt. "We should have a neighbor stay the night, just in case Vernon returns." Mitchell stood. "I'd be happy to keep watch, madam, if that wouldn't be improper." Elizabeth assessed him with a mother's critical eye before nodding slowly. "There's a room off the barn where our ranch hand stayed before Vernon drove him off. You're welcome to use it." "Thank you, madam. I should see to my horse, and then I'll check the property to make sure Blackwell isn't lurking nearby." As Mitchell headed for the door, Darcy called after him. "Mr. Price." He turned, struck again by her beauty despite her bedraggled state. "Be careful," she said simply. Mitchell tipped his hat with a small smile. "Always am, Miss Callahan." Outside, as he tended to his horse, Mitchell reflected on the unexpected turn his day had taken. He'd set out tracking a coyote, and instead found himself defending a family against a would-be murderer. His thoughts returned to Darcy, her courage in the face of death, the feel of her hand in his, the way her eyes had held his with such gratitude. He shook his head, focusing on unsaddling his horse. He'd known the girl less than an hour. Such thoughts were premature, to say the least. As twilight descended on the Callahan ranch, Mitchell made a thorough circuit of the property. He found no sign of Vernon's return, but noted the poor condition of the fences and outbuildings. The ranch had clearly suffered under Vernon's neglect, something Mitchell suspected extended to his treatment of the Callahan women as well. When he returned to the house, Elizabeth met him on the porch. "Darcy's resting," she said quietly. "The doctor came from town, says she'll be fine with a few days' rest." She hesitated. "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Price." "No thanks needed, madam. Anyone would have done the same." Her sad smile suggested she knew better. "There's stew on the stove if you're hungry. I've put fresh linens in the ranch hand's quarters." Mitchell thanked her and took his leave, not wanting to impose further on their privacy. In the small room off the barn, he found a narrow but clean bed, a washstand, and a three-legged stool. Simple accommodations, but far better than many he'd known in his years of drifting. He sat on the edge of the bed, cleaning his revolver by lamplight, ears attuned to any unusual sounds from the darkened property. Eventually, satisfied that Vernon wouldn't return that night, he lay down fully clothed, his gun within easy reach. His last thoughts before sleep claimed him were of Darcy Callahan's golden hair floating in the dark water of the well, and the relief he'd felt when she'd finally drawn breath. Morning dawned clear and cool, typical for early spring in Mendocino County. Mitchell woke with the first light, as was his habit. After washing his face in the basin, he stepped outside to find Elizabeth already tending the chickens. "Good morning, Mr. Price," she greeted him. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough, thank you, madam. Any sign of trouble in the night?" She shook her head. "Quiet as can be. Darcy's still asleep, poor child. I've never seen her so exhausted." Mitchell nodded, understanding the toll such terror would take. "I should ride into town, inform the sheriff about what happened yesterday." Elizabeth's expression clouded. "Vernon has friends in Ukiah, Sheriff Holden among them." This gave Mitchell pause. "Even so, an attempted murder can't be ignored." "Can't it?" Her bitter laugh held no humor. "You'd be surprised what men ignore when it comes to how other men treat their wives and daughters." Mitchell frowned. "Then perhaps I should speak with Judge Wilson instead. He struck me as a fair-minded man when I met him at the Harper place." A flicker of hope crossed Elizabeth's face. "Judge Wilson is a good man. His late wife was a dear friend." "I'll see him first, then," Mitchell decided. After a quick breakfast of coffee and biscuits, Mitchell saddled his horse. As he was preparing to leave, the back door opened and Darcy emerged. She wore a simple blue dress, her damp hair braided over one shoulder. Despite her ordeal, she walked with determination to where Mitchell stood. "Mr. Price," she said, her voice stronger than the previous day, "I wanted to thank you properly before you left." Mitchell tipped his hat. "No need for thanks, Miss Callahan. I'm just glad I was nearby." "You saved my life," she insisted. "I won't forget that." Something in her direct gaze made Mitchell's heart beat faster. He cleared his throat. "I'm riding to town to speak with Judge Wilson about what happened. Your mother seems to think the sheriff might not be entirely impartial." Darcy's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sheriff Holden and Vernon play cards every Thursday. They've been friends for years." Mitchell nodded. "All the more reason to involve the judge." "Do you feel up to making a statement, or should I come back another day?" Darcy straightened her shoulders. "I'll come with you now. The sooner this is settled, the better." Elizabeth, who had followed her daughter outside, began to protest. "Darcy, you need rest." "After what you've been through." "After what I've been through," Darcy interrupted gently. "I need to ensure Vernon faces consequences. Otherwise, we'll never be safe." Mitchell admired her resolve. "It's 8 miles to town. Are you certain you're strong enough for the ride?" Darcy's chin lifted. "I've been riding these hills since I could walk, Mr. Price. I'll manage." Elizabeth sighed, recognizing the determination in her daughter's stance. "At least eat something before you go, and take your father's mare. She's gentler than that wild thing Vernon bought." Within the hour, Mitchell and Darcy were riding toward Ukiah, the morning sun warming their backs. Mitchell kept their pace moderate, aware of Darcy's recent trauma despite her insistence that she was fine. "Have you worked for Mr. Harper long?" Darcy asked as they rode side by side along the rutted road. "About 3 months," Mitchell replied. "I'm usually not in one place that long, but Mr. Harper offered steady work breaking horses, which is something I've always had a knack for." "A drifter, then?" There was no judgment in her tone, merely curiosity. Mitchell nodded. "Since I was 17. My mother died when I was 16 and my father followed a year later. With no family left in Sacramento, I headed out to make my own way." "I'm sorry about your parents," Darcy said softly. "Losing my father 4 years ago nearly broke me. I can't imagine losing both." "It was hard," Mitchell admitted, "but I've made a decent living. Saved enough that I'm looking to put down roots somewhere eventually." Darcy glanced at him with interest. "Here in Mendocino County." Mitchell shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "It has its appeal. Good grazing land, plenty of water, beautiful countryside." His eyes met hers briefly. "Friendly people." A blush colored Darcy's cheeks as she looked away, focusing on the road ahead. They rode in companionable silence for a while before Darcy spoke again. "Did you really learn law from your father?" Mitchell chuckled. "Some basics. Enough to know that Vernon was lying about your mother's rights to the property. California protects widows better than most states." "Vernon counted on our ignorance," Darcy said, a hint of anger in her voice. "He's been selling off parcels of our land piece by piece, pocketing the money while letting everything else fall to ruin." "That explains the state of your fences," Mitchell observed. Darcy nodded. "Everything's been neglected since he moved in. The cattle are underfed, the fields unplanted." She sighed. "My father built that ranch from nothing. It breaks my heart to see what's become of it." Mitchell studied her profile, noting the determination beneath her sorrow. "It can be rebuilt," he said gently. "Land responds to care, just like people do." Her grateful smile warmed him more than the spring sunshine. As they approached Ukiah, the small town's activity came into view. Wagons moved along the main street, carrying goods and passengers. The newly built railroad station stood proudly at the town's edge, a symbol of the region's growing connections to the wider world. Mitchell and Darcy tied their horses at the hitching post outside the courthouse, a modest but dignified building constructed of local redwood. Inside, they were directed to Judge Wilson's chambers by a clerk who eyed Darcy's still damp hair with curiosity. Judge Emmett Wilson was a tall, austere man with a neatly trimmed white beard and penetrating blue eyes. He rose when Darcy entered, his formal demeanor softening slightly at the sight of her. "Miss Callahan," he said warmly, "I haven't seen you since the county fair last autumn. How is your mother?" "That's partly why we're here, Your Honor," Darcy replied, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. For the next half hour, Mitchell and Darcy related the events of the previous day. The judge listened intently, his expression growing increasingly grave. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "This is a very serious accusation," he said finally. "Attempted murder is a hanging offense." Darcy paled slightly but nodded. "I understand, Your Honor. I wouldn't make such a claim lightly." Judge Wilson turned to Mitchell. "You say you witnessed him holding her under the water?" "Yes, sir," Mitchell confirmed. "There's no doubt about what I saw." The judge sighed heavily. "Vernon Blackwell has influential friends in this county. This won't be simple." He looked at Darcy with fatherly concern. "Are you prepared for what this might mean? A public trial, people taking sides, your family's private matters exposed." Darcy's hands trembled slightly in her lap, but her voice remained steady. "If we don't stand against him, he'll come back. Next time, Mr. Price might not be there to help." Judge Wilson nodded slowly, then rose from his desk. "I'll issue a warrant for Vernon Blackwell's arrest immediately. In the meantime, I suggest you and your mother stay with friends or relatives, somewhere Blackwell won't think to look." "We have nowhere else to go," Darcy admitted. "Our nearest relatives are in Oregon." "Then I'll send Deputies Collins and Ramirez to your ranch until Blackwell is apprehended," the judge decided. "They're good men who don't share Sheriff Holden's friendship with your stepfather." Relief flooded Darcy's face. "Thank you, Your Honor." As they prepared to leave, Judge Wilson called Mitchell back. "A word, young man." Darcy waited in the outer office while the judge spoke privately to Mitchell. "Harper tells me you're a reliable sort," Wilson said, studying Mitchell carefully. "I try to be, sir. The deputies will protect the Callahan women from Blackwell, but that ranch needs attention. The fences, the livestock, the spring planting, it all needs a capable hand." The judge raised an eyebrow. "I understand you might be looking for more permanent work." Mitchell blinked in surprise. "I am, but Elizabeth Callahan is too proud to ask for help," Wilson continued. but that ranch will fail without it. I promised her late husband I'd look out for them, but my judicial duties keep me town-bound." He fixed Mitchell with a penetrating stare. "Would you consider staying on at the Callahan place, at least until this matter with Blackwell is resolved? I'd pay your wages myself." Mitchell considered the offer. "With respect, sir, if I stay on at the Callahan ranch, I'd prefer Mrs. Callahan employ me directly. No disrespect to your generous offer." A smile cracked the judge's serious expression. "Direct and honorable, good qualities," he nodded. "Very well. I'll speak with Elizabeth myself, recommend she consider hiring you. The rest will be between you and the Callahans." "Thank you, sir." As they rode back to the ranch, Mitchell debated whether to mention the judge's suggestion to Darcy. Before he could decide, she spoke. "Judge Wilson asked you to stay and help us, didn't he?" Mitchell glanced at her in surprise. "How did you know?" A small smile played on her lips. "He's been trying to send help since my father died. My mother has refused every time. And what do you think she'll say to me?" Darcy considered this as they rode. "After yesterday, she might be more receptive. We do need help, and Vernon drove away our last ranch hand months ago." "I wouldn't want to impose," Mitchell said carefully. "It wouldn't be imposing if we hired you properly," Darcy countered. "We can't pay much until we sell some cattle, but the room and board are included." Mitchell found himself smiling at her practical approach. "I'll speak with your mother when we return." They arrived back at the Callahan ranch to find 2 deputies already there, having ridden out as soon as Judge Wilson issued their orders. Elizabeth was visibly relieved to see Darcy return safely. "Judge Wilson has issued a warrant for Vernon's arrest," Darcy informed her mother as they entered the house. "Deputies Collins and Ramirez will stay until he's apprehended." Elizabeth nodded, her hands twisting her apron nervously. "Vernon won't go quietly," she predicted. "He's never taken well to being crossed." Mitchell remained respectfully by the door. "Madam, if I might have a word." Elizabeth looked at him questioningly, then followed him onto the porch. Mitchell removed his hat, holding it respectfully as he made his proposition. "Mrs. Callahan, I noticed your ranch needs attention. With spring planting season approaching and your fences in disrepair, I'd like to offer my services as a ranch hand, at least until you can hire someone permanent." Elizabeth's expression tightened. "Mr. Price, while I appreciate your help yesterday, we cannot afford charity." "It wouldn't be charity, madam," Mitchell assured her. "I'm proposing fair work for fair wages, whatever you can manage. Room and board would offset some of the cost." She studied him for a long moment. "Why would you do this? You have a good position with Mr. Harper." Mitchell considered his answer carefully. "My father taught me that when you see someone in need, you help them. Your ranch has potential, but it needs work that you and Miss Darcy can't do alone. And once Vernon is caught—" Elizabeth asked, "What then?" "Then we reassess," Mitchell said simply. "No obligation beyond what works for both of us." Elizabeth's gaze drifted to the neglected fields and broken fences. "Mr. Harper won't mind losing you. I've fulfilled my contract with him," Mitchell replied. "He'll understand." After another long moment, Elizabeth nodded slowly. $2 a week plus room and board. It's less than you'd get elsewhere." "It's fair," Mitchell assured her, extending his hand. "I'll ride to the Harper place tomorrow to collect my things if that suits you." Elizabeth shook his hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Thank you, Mr. Price." "Mitchell, please, madam. If I'm to work for you, formalities seem unnecessary." A ghost of a smile touched Elizabeth's lips. "Mitchell, then, the room you used last night will be yours for as long as you stay." Word of Vernon Blackwell's attempted murder of his stepdaughter spread quickly through Ukiah. By the following day, when Mitchell returned from collecting his belongings at the Harper Ranch, opinions in town had divided predictably. Those who knew the Callahans well believed Darcy's account. Vernon's drinking companion stood firmly by him, dismissing the accusations as a family squabble blown out of proportion. Vernon himself had disappeared. Rumors placed him across the state line in Oregon, or perhaps hiding in the hills with old prospector friends. The uncertainty kept the deputies stationed at the Callahan ranch, their presence a comfort to Elizabeth and Darcy. Mitchell threw himself into the work of restoring the ranch. The first priority was mending fences to contain the remaining cattle, which had dwindled from over 100 head in Mr. Callahan's time to barely 30 under Vernon's neglect. The animals were thin but healthy enough, and with proper grazing management, Mitchell was confident they could rebuild the herd. Darcy worked alongside him whenever her mother would allow it, her knowledge of the ranch and its operations impressing Mitchell daily. She knew which pastures flooded in heavy rains, which springs ran dry in summer, which trees provided the best shade for calving cows. Her father had taught her well, treating her as the son he never had. "Pa always said I had a better head for ranching than most men he knew," she told Mitchell one afternoon as they repaired a gate together. Vernon couldn't stand that, said it wasn't natural for a woman to know such things. Mitchell handed her a nail, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Your father was right. You understand this land better than anyone." The compliment brought a flush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. "Not better than you," she demurred. "I've never seen anyone calm a spooked horse the way you do." "That's just experience," Mitchell replied. "But knowing the land, that's wisdom. Can't be learned so easily." As April turned to May, the ranch began to show signs of recovery. The vegetable garden behind the house flourished under Elizabeth's care, the repaired fences kept the cattle contained, and the first hay cutting promised to be bountiful. Even the house itself seemed to brighten, as if responding to the renewed purpose of its inhabitants. Mitchell found himself watching Darcy more than was proper. He admired her resilience, her determination to restore what her stepfather had nearly destroyed. When she laughed something, she did more frequently as the weeks past the sound made his heart lighter than it had been in years. He was not alone in his admiration. Deputy Collins, a handsome young man with an easy smile, often lingered to talk with Darcy when his shift ended. His interest was obvious to everyone except, perhaps, Darcy herself, who treated him with the same friendly respect she showed Mitchell. One evening, as Mitchell sat on the porch mending a bridle by the last light of day, Elizabeth joined him. She settled into the rocking chair with a sigh, her hands busy with mending of her own. "You've made a remarkable difference here," she said after a comfortable silence. "The ranch hasn't looked this good since my husband was alive." "It's good land," Mitchell replied, "just needed some attention." Elizabeth's hands stilled in her lap. "It's more than that. You've brought hope back to this place." She hesitated. "Especially for Darcy." Mitchell kept his eyes on his work, though his hands had stopped moving. "Miss Darcy is a remarkable young woman, strong, determined." "Yes, she is." Elizabeth studied him carefully. "She thinks very highly of you, you know." Heat crept up Mitchell's neck. "I'm just doing the job you hired me for, madam. Are you?" There was no accusation in her tone, only gentle inquiry. "Because sometimes I see you looking at my daughter the way my late husband used to look at me." Mitchell set aside the bridle, finally meeting Elizabeth's gaze. "Mrs. Callahan, I would never presume. It's not presumption I'm worried about," she interrupted softly. "It's Darcy's heart. She's had enough pain in her young life." "I would never hurt her," Mitchell said firmly, "but I understand your concern. I'm just a ranch hand with few prospects." Elizabeth shook her head. "That's not what concerns me. My husband was just a ranch hand when I married him." She leaned forward. What concerns me is whether you plan to stay or if you'll drift on once Vernon is caught and the danger has passed." The question struck at the heart of something Mitchell had been pondering himself. For the first time in his drifting life, he found himself wanting to put down roots. "I can't promise what the future holds," he said honestly. "But I can tell you that I've never felt as much at home anywhere as I do here." Elizabeth seemed satisfied with this answer. She resumed her mending with a small nod. "That's fair enough for now." The conversation might have continued, but Darcy's appearance in the doorway interrupted them. She looked between her mother and Mitchell with curiosity. "Am I interrupting something? Just idle conversation," Elizabeth assured her, rising from her chair. "I'm heading to bed. Don't stay up too late, either of you." After Elizabeth had gone inside, Darcy took her mother's place in the rocking chair. The evening air was cool but pleasant, filled with the scent of blooming wildflowers from the nearby fields. "Deputy Collins said they've had reports of Vernon in Willits," Darcy said after a moment. "They think he's trying to make his way to San Francisco," Mitchell nodded. "That would be smart of him, easy to disappear in a city that size." "Part of me hopes he makes it," Darcy admitted quietly. "Then he'd be gone from our lives for good. And justice for what he did to you." Darcy's fingers traced the wooden arm of the rocking chair. "Is it terrible that I care more about being free of him than seeing him punished?" "No," Mitchell said gently. "It's human." Darcy smiled gratefully at his understanding. "Deputy Collins asked if he could call on me properly once this is all resolved," she said, changing the subject. Mitchell's hands tightened involuntarily on the bridle. "He seems like a decent man." "He is," Darcy agreed. "Kind, responsible." She glanced at Mitchell. "I told him I wasn't ready for callers." Mitchell tried to ignore the relief that flooded through him at her words. "Any particular reason?" Darcy's rocking slowed. "My heart isn't free to give," she said softly. The admission hung between them in the gathering darkness. Mitchell set aside the bridle entirely, turning to face her. "Darcy," he began, her name feeling right on his lips despite the impropriety of using it without her permission. "I'm not a man of means or position. I've spent most of my life drifting from one job to the next. But these past weeks here," he searched for the right words. "For the first time I can imagine staying in one place, building something lasting. With me." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "If you'll have me," Mitchell replied, equally soft. "Though your mother might have something to say about that." A small smile played at Darcy's lips. "My mother has already informed me that while you lack polish, you possess integrity which she values far more highly." Mitchell chuckled. "High praise indeed." Darcy's expression grew serious again. "Vernon is still out there. Until he's caught, none of this feels quite real." "It's real," Mitchell assured her, reaching for her hand. "Whatever happens with Vernon, my feelings won't change." Her fingers intertwined with his, warm and certain. "Nor will mine." They sat in companionable silence as the stars appeared overhead, their joined hands a promise neither spoke aloud but both understood perfectly. The peaceful rhythm they had established at the ranch was shattered 2 weeks later. Mitchell was repairing the roof of the barn when he saw a cloud of dust on the road leading to the property. He climbed down quickly, grabbing his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. "Deputies," he called toward the house. "Riders coming." Deputy Ramirez emerged from the shade where he'd been whittling, instantly alert. Deputy Collins appeared from behind the house, where he'd been helping Elizabeth with a stubborn water pump. The 3 men positioned themselves between the approaching riders and the house, where Darcy now stood on the porch, her mother behind her. As the riders drew closer, Mitchell recognized Sheriff Holden leading a group of 5 men. His stomach tightened with foreboding. "Stay inside," he called to Darcy and Elizabeth, but Darcy merely moved to stand beside him, her chin raised defiantly. Sheriff Holden reined his horse to a stop a few yards away. He was a heavy-set man with a bushy mustache and cold eyes that took in the scene with obvious disapproval. "Mrs. Blackwell," he addressed Elizabeth, deliberately using her married name. "I've come to discuss these outrageous accusations against your husband." "My name is Callahan," Elizabeth replied firmly, "and there's nothing to discuss. Vernon attempted to murder my daughter. Mr. Price witnessed it." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Mitchell, contempt evident. "Yes, the drifter who's conveniently moved onto your property since making these claims." "Sheriff," Deputy Collins interjected, "Judge Wilson issued the warrant. The evidence was compelling." "Evidence?" Holden scoffed. "The word of a girl against a respected property owner. Vernon Blackwell has lived in this county for 20 years. He's explained everything to me." Mitchell's grip tightened on his rifle. "Explained what exactly?" "That his stepdaughter was attempting to harm herself out of spite. That he was trying to stop her, and you misinterpreted what you saw." The sheriff's smile was cold. "Wouldn't be the first hysterical female to create drama where none existed." Darcy's sharp intake of breath was the only indication of her fury. "Is that what Vernon told you when you were playing cards together, Sheriff, while drinking his whiskey?" One of the men behind the sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Holden, maybe we should—" "Quiet, Davis," the sheriff snapped. He turned his attention back to the Callahans. "I'm here to inform you that Vernon Blackwell is returning to his rightful property today. Any attempts to prevent this will be considered obstruction of justice." "This is my property," Elizabeth declared. "Vernon has no claim to it." "Not according to the deed I've seen," Sheriff Holden retorted. "Vernon showed me the papers himself. This land was transferred to him legally after your marriage." "That's impossible," Darcy protested. "My father left everything to my mother." "Then you'll need to produce those documents," the sheriff replied smugly. "Until then, Vernon Blackwell remains the legal owner." Mitchell stepped forward. "Judge Wilson has already confirmed Mrs. Callahan's right to this property under California law. If Blackwell has some deed, it's either forged or was obtained through coercion." "Watch yourself, Cowboy," Holden warned. "You're on thin ice as it is." Deputy Ramirez moved to stand beside Mitchell. "Sheriff, we have orders from Judge Wilson to protect the Callahan women until Vernon Blackwell is apprehended to face charges of attempted murder." "And I'm the county sheriff," Holden retorted, "with authority over both of you. You're relieved of this duty, effective immediately. Return to town and report to me tomorrow." The deputies exchanged troubled glances. Collins stepped forward. "With respect, Sheriff, we need confirmation from Judge Wilson to—" "The judge is away in Sacramento for the circuit court," Holden interrupted. "I'm in charge until his return." Mitchell saw the calculation in the sheriff's eyes. With Judge Wilson away, Holden had seized the opportunity to support his friend without judicial interference. "Where is Vernon now?" Mitchell asked, scanning the surrounding hills. "Waiting for my signal that it's safe to return," Holden replied. "Now step aside and let the law take its course." Mitchell held his ground. "The law says attempted murder is a hanging offense. The law says a widow retains rights to her property. Which law are you upholding, Sheriff?" Holden's face darkened. "Last warning. Step aside or face arrest for interfering with an officer of the law." The tension was broken by Elizabeth's calm voice. "I have my husband's will and the original property deed in the strongbox inside. They prove my ownership beyond any doubt." Holden hesitated, clearly not having expected this. "I'll need to see those documents." "Of course," Elizabeth agreed. "Darcy, would you fetch the strongbox from beneath my bed?" Darcy nodded and disappeared into the house. Mitchell kept his eyes on the sheriff and his men, noting the way they scanned the property, as if looking for something or someone. "Vernon isn't with you," Mitchell realized aloud. "He's already here, isn't he?" The sheriff's momentary expression of surprise confirmed Mitchell's suspicion. Without hesitation, Mitchell sprinted for the house, shouting Darcy's name. He burst through the door in time to see Vernon Blackwell emerging from Elizabeth's bedroom, Darcy struggling in his grip, a knife at her throat. The strongbox lay open on the floor, papers scattered. "Not another step," Vernon warned, his eyes wild. "I'll cut her throat." Mitchell froze, his rifle useless with Darcy as a shield. Behind him, he heard Elizabeth's cry of distress as she entered the house, followed by the deputies. "Let her go, Vernon," Mitchell said evenly. "You're only making things worse for yourself." Vernon laughed bitterly. "Worse? I'm already facing the gallows, according to you." The knife pressed closer to Darcy's throat, drawing a thin line of blood. "At least this way I get some satisfaction." "Vernon," Sheriff Holden had entered, his expression showing genuine alarm for the first time. "This isn't what we discussed." "Plans change," Vernon snarled. "These women have taken everything from me, my reputation, my property." "Your property?" Darcy gasped despite the knife. "You forged my father's signature on those transfer documents. I found the practice sheets in your desk." Vernon's grip tightened. "Shut up, you meddlesome girl." Mitchell's mind raced, assessing options. The room was crowded now with Elizabeth, both deputies, and the sheriff all witness to Vernon's desperation. Any sudden move could end with Darcy's death. "Vernon," Mitchell said calmly, setting his rifle aside as a show of good faith. "There's no way out of this house that doesn't end with you dead or in chains, but there's still a chance to walk away from the gallows if you release Darcy now." Vernon's eyes darted around the room, calculating. "Everyone out," he demanded. "Just the girl and me. I want a horse saddled and waiting." "Not happening," Mitchell replied firmly. "You know we can't let you leave with her." Vernon's hand shook slightly, causing the knife to nick Darcy's skin again. She winced but remained remarkably composed, her eyes locked with Mitchell's across the room. "What do you want, Vernon?" Mitchell asked, trying a different approach. "Money. There's a strongbox right there." "I want what's mine," Vernon hissed. "This land, the cattle. Everything Joseph Callahan built that should have passed to me when I married his widow." Elizabeth stepped forward despite Deputy Collins's attempt to hold her back. "It was never yours, Vernon. Never. I married you because I was lonely and afraid of running the ranch alone. That was my mistake, but this land belongs to Darcy and me." Vernon's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful," whatever insult he intended was cut short as Darcy suddenly drove her elbow hard into his ribs. Vernon's grip loosened just enough for her to duck beneath the knife. Mitchell lunged forward, tackling Vernon before he could recover. They crashed into the bedroom wall, the knife slashing wildly between them. Mitchell felt a burning pain across his forearm, but managed to grip Vernon's wrist, smashing it against the doorframe until the knife clattered to the floor. Vernon fought with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. His fist connected with Mitchell's jaw, sending him staggering backward. Vernon scrambled for the knife, but Deputy Ramirez was faster, his boot pinning Vernon's hand to the floor. "That's enough, Blackwell," the deputy said, his revolver aimed at Vernon's head. For a moment it seemed Vernon might continue struggling. Then, as if a puppeteer had cut his strings, he collapsed against the floor, the fight draining out of him. "Get him out of here," Sheriff Holden ordered, his earlier alliance with Vernon apparently forgotten in the face of such blatant criminality. "Lock him in the jail until Judge Wilson returns." As the deputies hauled Vernon to his feet, he spat at Elizabeth. "This isn't over. I still have friends in this county." "Not anymore," Sheriff Holden said grimly. Attempted murder in front of witnesses, including a sheriff. You'll hang for this, Vernon. Mitchell barely registered the sheriff's convenient change of heart. His attention was entirely on Darcy, who stood trembling by the scattered papers, her hand pressed to the shallow cut on her throat. "Are you all right?" he asked, reaching for her. She nodded, falling into his embrace without hesitation. "You're bleeding," she murmured, noticing the slash on his arm. "It's nothing," Mitchell assured her, though the wound stung fiercely. "I thought I'd lost you." Darcy pulled back enough to meet his gaze. "Never," she promised, her eyes conveying what words couldn't in the crowded room. As the deputies escorted Vernon outside, Sheriff Holden lingered, his expression uncomfortable. "Mrs. Callahan," he began awkwardly. "It appears I was misinformed about certain matters. Vernon assured me, save your explanations for Judge Wilson." Elizabeth cut him off coldly. "I'm sure he'll be interested to hear how you undermined his authority while he was away." The sheriff's face reddened, but he offered no further defense as he followed his deputies outside. In the sudden quiet of the house, Elizabeth gathered the scattered papers from the floor, restoring them carefully to the strongbox. "He was looking for these," she said, holding up the original deed to the ranch and her husband's will. "He must have realized I kept them hidden." Darcy moved to help her mother, wincing as the movement pulled at the cut on her neck. Mitchell retrieved a clean handkerchief from his pocket, gently pressing it to the wound. "We should have the doctor look at that," he said softly. "And your arm," Darcy countered, her fingers lightly touching the blood seeping through his torn shirt. Elizabeth watched their interaction with knowing eyes. "I'll ride into town with the sheriff," she decided. "I want to make sure Vernon is properly locked away and I can bring Dr. Maxwell back with me." "I'll go instead," Mitchell offered. "You both have had enough excitement for one day." "No," Elizabeth said firmly. "I need to see Vernon behind bars with my own eyes, and—" she hesitated. "I think you and Darcy have things to discuss in private." With that remarkably astute observation, Elizabeth gathered her shawl and followed the law officers outside, leaving Mitchell and Darcy alone in the suddenly quiet house. For a long moment, they simply stood together, the reality of what had nearly happened sinking in. Then Darcy took Mitchell's hand, leading him to the kitchen where she could tend to his wound. She worked in silence, cleaning the cut with practiced efficiency. It was long but not deep, requiring no stitches. When she had bandaged it, her hands lingered on his arm. "I was so afraid," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Not for myself, but that he would hurt you." Mitchell gently tilted her chin up, examining the cut on her neck. It had stopped bleeding but would leave a thin scar, a permanent reminder of Vernon's cruelty. "I would have died before I let him take you," Mitchell said, the intensity of his feelings surprising even him. Darcy's eyes filled with tears that she refused to shed. "I've spent 4 years being afraid," she whispered. "Afraid of Vernon, afraid for my mother. Afraid we would lose everything my father built." Her fingers tightened on his arm. "I don't want to be afraid anymore." "You won't have to be," Mitchell promised. "Vernon will face justice. Your ranch is recovering. You're safe now." A single tear escaped, tracking down her cheek. Mitchell brushed it away with his thumb. "Darcy," he said solemnly, "I know this may seem sudden, though it doesn't feel that way to me. These past weeks have shown me exactly what I want for my future, and that's to build a life here with you if you'll have me." Her eyes widened. "Mitchell, are you?" "I am," he confirmed. "I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife." "Not immediately," he added hastily. "We could have a proper courtship first, if that's what you want." A smile bloomed on Darcy's face, transforming her features despite the ordeal she had just endured. "A proper courtship seems unnecessary when I already know my heart," she said. "Yes, Mitchell, I will marry you." Mitchell pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of her injury. Their first kiss was tender, a promise of the life they would build together on the land they both loved. Vernon Blackwell's trial was swift and decisive. With multiple witnesses to his attempted murder of Darcy, including the sheriff himself, the jury deliberated less than an hour before finding him guilty. Judge Wilson sentenced him to 20 years in San Quentin prison, a punishment many in Ukiah felt was too lenient, but which spared him the gallows. Mitchell and Darcy were married that autumn in a simple ceremony on the Callahan ranch. Elizabeth gave her blessing wholeheartedly, recognizing in Mitchell the same steadfast character her late husband had possessed. Judge Wilson performed the ceremony beneath an arch of autumn leaves, with half the county in attendance. As Darcy and Mitchell exchanged vows, the ranch around them bore testament to their shared labor. The fences stood strong, the cattle had increased by a third, and the farmhouse gleamed with fresh paint. What Vernon had nearly destroyed, they had rebuilt together, stronger than before. In the years that followed, the Price family flourished on the land Joseph Callahan had claimed. Elizabeth remained in the main house, while Mitchell built a larger home nearby for their growing family. Their first son, Joseph, was born the following summer, followed by twin girls 2 years later. The well where Vernon had tried to drown Darcy was eventually filled in, and a cherry tree planted over it, Darcy's idea, to transform a place of fear into one of beauty and life. Each spring when it blossomed, Darcy and Mitchell would sit beneath its branches, marveling at how close they had come to never finding each other, and how one desperate cry for help had changed their lives forever. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they watched their children playing beneath that cherry tree, Mitchell took Darcy's hand, his thumb tracing the thin scar on her throat that had faded but never disappeared entirely. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Darcy leaned her head against his shoulder, her golden hair now threaded with a few strands of silver. "Only that my father never got to meet you," she replied. "He would have loved seeing what we've built here." Mitchell's arm tightened around her waist. "He would be proud of you. I certainly am." The Callahan Price Ranch became one of the most prosperous in Mendocino County, known for its fine cattle and generous hospitality. The story of how they met of a desperate cry heard by a passing cowboy became family legend, told and retold to their children and grandchildren. And if, on quiet nights, Darcy sometimes woke trembling from dreams of dark water closing over her head, Mitchell was always there to hold her close, a living reminder that she had been saved, not just from drowning that day, but for a lifetime of love neither of them had dared to imagine before fate, and courage brought them together beside an old well on a neglected ranch in Ukiah.